Anyway, moving right along, I was realized that I've just known you as Bailey for so long that your last name is Spencer Jackson, right?
Correct.
And it's hyphenated.
Correct.
So your full name would be Bailey Spencer Jackson.
I know. It sounds like a law firm, doesn't it?
Well, when I say it for real and there's a pause between Bailey and Spencer Jackson, know that my brain is filling in Spencer Jackson.
Okay.
Another thing I realized I didn't know much about you is what your day job consisted of.
My title was Director of Business and Legal Affairs, which is a fancy way of saying I worked in both the business affairs and the legal affairs department at a major studio. Business and legal affairs are the people who make the deals with the talent and then create the contracts that back them up. You get on the phone with the agent for the talent that you want, and you spend time negotiating whatever perks they want. You say, this is how much we can pay you. This is where we're shooting. So we may or may not have access to a fancy dressing room, but this is what, pretty much everybody's going to get, because a lot of our shoots were international and remote locations. So our things we could bring in. So it was that kind of thing that you had to deal with and work around, as opposed to, they get their whole suite or whatever that they get in theatrical. And then you take the deal points from that agreement, you put it into your contract template, plug all the stuff in, send it out. They would come back and say, we want this changed, we want this changed, we want this changed. You would give them what you can, what was reasonable, not give them what they can't. You go back and forth a few times, then everybody signs it, and then you have talent engaged to do the picture. And this is the same process for, producer, director, writer, cinematographer, pretty much everybody except for below the line people.
Like you.
Well, because I was studio, I don't get to have that stuff. And Universal always had a very strict policy that employees could not receive credits in the titles.
I noticed that's loosening up these days.
Live action, they are loosening up with some of the smaller productions like Amazon originals and Netflix originals, but the big major studios are still pretty tight on that. DreamWorks was the one who kind of broke that barrier a little bit with their animated stuff, and they've carried it over into the live action as well.
It's fun to watch the names scroll by.
Yeah. Oh, even at home, if we watch a movie on Netflix or Amazon or whatever, we do watch the credits.
Do you think that the reason Amazon does that is it's a vestige from student films?
Well, I think part of it is, I think it's a combination of those things. I was going to say amalgam, because I think it's actually more than those two things. One, it used to be, especially for student films, that was your only compensation was your credit. Studios also felt that because you were getting a paycheck, you didn't need that extra credit on top of that. It also kept studios from poaching from other studios by reading the credits and going, oh, that was the executive in charge of production. Maybe get that person and try and hire them away from whatever studio was doing it. Also, they used to keep, if you go way back, all of the credits were in the front. And there were maybe 20, 25 people. That originally was because they didn't want people to walk out during the end credits. And that was the only way to ensure that people saw the credits. More importantly, it was a financial reason, because film cost money per foot. So you kept everything as tight as possible because you didn't want to pay any more film footage than you absolutely had to. Whereas now, in the age of digital, it doesn't matter. You can do 100 takes on something and you don't lose any money, because all you're taking up is space on a disk drive that you can delete later and reuse. So that's a big reason why end credits have gotten so long.
You know how at the end of like special effect films, they have all the different special effect houses say, my brilliant thought was that if you could include like a still of the sequence they worked on, it would make that much more sense.
Well, for instance, if we hired one FX studio that would do basically all of let's take Death Race.
Right.
But so you'd have one effects house that would be on set, and they would set up the visual effects with all of the cables, with the cars shooting off into the air and spinning and then landing and somebody walking away from it. So that house specialized in that. And then once you got the sequence all put together, you would hire a much less expensive visual effects house to go in and render out all of those cables and all of the ramps that the cars actually went up when it looks like they just went from the ground. So, I mean, I see your point. Yes, it would be great if you could see those, but nobody wants to see the green screen, hey, this is what we did, but it was all in front of a green screen, because it doesn't really make any sense when it's all taken apart. It only really makes sense when you get, because it'll be sometimes with these huge budget films, you get 4, 5, even 6 houses that worked on one scene.
Okay, well, those are my veneer of knowledge kind of thing. So I'm kind of ready to start. Just to let you know, the process is I'm going to, with the miracle of Zoom, it records an audio file. I'll Dropbox you the unedited, this thing, what we're doing now. Then I'll go back and edit it and take it down. And then I'll give it to you before I release it and say, did anything not appear as brilliant as it seemed to be at the time? And I'll take
Final
it out.
cut approval?
Yeah.
Wow, that's
And
an A-list.
Yeah. Welcome to another episode of Fair Folk at Work. Have you ever seen peasants eat and wonder why they're eating so well? Or have you ever seen women at a washing well whapping fabric against rocks and wondered, Well, my guest today is certainly here to spread insight on that and hopefully other things as well. Her name is Bailey Spencer Jackson, and she's here with me today. Hi, Bailey.
Hi there. How are you, Dan?
I'm doing well.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just jump right into it. What was your fair name?
Oh, you would ask that. I actually have one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a couple of years since I've used it. I would have to look that up. You know what? I can look it up now if you like.
Sure.
That's very weird. I can't even. And it's not even that difficult. Yeah, no, my fair name is Jillian Gray.
Why did you select Jillian Gray?
Well, Jillian is a period name. It's spelled with a G, not a J. It's a period name. It's feminine, basically, of Jeffrey, which really has nothing to do with it. But that's, hey, surprise. And Gray is because my husband portrayed a character called Francis Gray, and he was in Her Majesty's service, which is why while he was out bumming around the world, doing things that I'm not supposed to know about, I had to take on a job as a washerwoman while I was at the well.
Before you went, what did somebody tell you about FAIR that made you want to go out and do it?
Oh, wow. Well, the first time I ever went to FAIR was back in Agoura, and I went specifically because someone I knew was getting married there. They were having their wedding at FAIR. And I had heard of FAIR, and I had friends who had worked FAIR early 80s. I thought it sounded kind of cool. I didn't really know anything about it. So I went to the wedding. And I went with my then husband, and there was a bunch of people, and we were all a big theater group. So we were all very theatrical, as you might imagine. And one of the gals that I was doing a bunch of shows with, once the wedding was over, she said, okay, I'm tired of waiting around for all these other people to do something. Let's go and walk about. And I said, okay. So we went, and I think we hit probably 4 or 5 ale stands along the way. And my friend began, as we were walking down the street, began screaming very loudly, because she was a FAIR performer and a stage performer, 2 drunken lesbians in search of a to change their minds. As you can imagine, we got a lot of attention. And when my then husband caught up with us, he wasn't pleased. And I didn't go back to FAIR until I went on a date with a friend in Devore, which had to be in 92, 91, somewhere around in there. And when I went, and it was much more low key, I kind of fell in love with it and just the whole idea of it, because I was actually paying attention that time. And I loved the different performers and the way they portrayed the class system, where you had the nobles and you had the merchants, and you had the military, and then you had the common folk or peasants, which is kind of a derogatory term, but common folk. The mongers were great fun to play with because they were standing out in the street, selling pigs' heads and things like that, which just sort of lent to it. So I thought it was very theatrical and fun. I thought, I kind of want to do this. And so my first fair after that, I was several years later when a couple of friends and I decided we were going to go up to Northern Fair because we'd heard about it, but we didn't really know anything about it. So we got off work one Friday night and we hopped in my car and we drove up overnight straight through from Los Angeles to Novato, got there very early in the morning and parked and tried to sleep. And there was a lot of comedy going on in the car from 3 sleep-deprived people. And we went around fair that day and had a great time. And I met someone who said, you'd be really good at this. Well, do you want a job? And I met him and I met his boss that ran the booth he was working for. And I ended up finishing out working that run of fair and then kind of never turned back. I came back down here and auditioned and got into a cast at Southern and then worked Southern. I have done stage shows. I've been the assistant guild master for a guild that was just coming back after a several-year hiatus. Then I ended up moving over to the Well, which is a different guild or group that was well established and had to adjust to get into how they ran their things because everything's run differently depending on the personality who's the guild master.
Okay, I have 2 questions that come out of that. First of all, they had a wedding while fair was going on?
Yes.
Good Lord.
Yeah, well, they had set up a tent, so it was shaded, and I forget whose guild yard it was in, but they'd set up a tent. It was only 2 people and their officiant, but there were maybe 50 guests total, and so we all kind of crowded into this very small tent, and it was hot, Segura, in the spring, and we had stuff going on outside of the tent and all around us, but we could be in sort of a semi-enclosed space and have the wedding. It was really fun. I thought, never would have occurred to me to do this, seeing as how both of the participants in the wedding had been working fair for a long time. So that was just what they wanted to do.
So it sounds like a rather gradual process of you discovering fair kind of on your own.
It was. It wasn't like I went once and immediately leapt into it. It sort of took a few years. At that point, I was working full time. Plus I was also doing community theater and sometimes even, paid theater, semi-pro, 5 to 7 nights a week. So throwing in something else
On the weekend.
Yeah. And it's a big commitment because fair runs 7 weekends. Plus you've got all of your weekends of rehearsals and builds, and then you've got teardowns. So the whole thing lasts 10 weeks, 11 weeks. Depending on when you start rehearsals and how much it is. Some of the shows we've done, we started putting together the shows and only rehearsing here and there for months.
Right.
Starting
I am aware
February.
Of that phenomenon. Yeah.
You are painfully aware of that phenomenon. Yeah, so it just took so much time. It didn't really occur to me to do it at first. But once I sort of stuck my foot in the water, it was like standing on, thin ice and it giving way, and I fell in head first, or feet first, as it were, if you were on ice.
Do you remember who your first sort of mentors were at fair?
Yeah.
Who were they?
Adlai Kleiman was the one who really sort of took me under his wing and got me my first job with Ray Griswold. And they sort of shepherded me around and showed me the ropes.
Do you remember any lessons that they imparted to you?
Beware of drunk guys. Treat everyone just exactly the same. It doesn't matter if when you're at fair, people try and do costumes quickly and without a lot of assistance. So if somebody shows up in peasant blouse and a broom skirt and a pair of sandals, you treat them with the same deference as someone who's wearing a $2,000 court gown. They're still my lady. You still treat them as though they have just spent their entire life for this one moment of interaction with you. Because that's, for them, on the outside looking in, that's what it is. You got the attention of a participant of faire and took the time to make that moment special for them. That was the first thing, was learning, faire speak, being able to sort of put it into context for them. And they will invariably, the first thing they will do is laugh at you, because they couldn't, they're trying to wrap their head around it, a vaguely different language, and they laugh. But if they laugh with you, you know it, and it makes them just want to play even more. And as a performer, and especially as anyone who enjoys improv, that's the meat, because the more you play with them, the more they play with you back. And watching Adley play with people, because he was a posy seller, and he would carry around this big basket full of flowers, and he didn't approach the women, he would approach the men and talk to the men and talk them into buying the girl on, or the woman on their arm. Here's a beautiful posy for your beauteous lady. Don't you think she deserves this? Let me show you how it smells. Let me show you how it will look when placed upon her breast thusly, and he was really good at it. And watching him, I got to be really good at it. And for years we had a running contest who would sell more posies on any given day.
So, Bailey, is there anyone else you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, actually, I would love to talk about Merlin. He was the guildmaster at St. Helena's, under whom I served as assistant guildmaster. And Merlin has been around since the old Agora days. And so he was a font of useful information. He was great at sort of corralling people and getting them super interested. And then I was much more the nuts and bolts portion of the guildmaster biz. He was very much the PR arm, the person who people really listened to and would come to with like personal problems or personal issues, whereas I was much more hands-on, practical, get things done. I mean, not to say that he was not also good at the practical. He was great at building things, but especially during the run, he had his own things that he was out doing away from the site, whereas I would be at the site more than he very often.
It kind of sounds like he was the sort of heart of the organization.
Yes, I will absolutely say that. And I learned a lot actually working with him, just in watching how he could get people to think differently, and they would end up sometimes figuring out the own answers to their problems, as opposed to, going to him to fix it. They'd figure it out on their own because the way he would talk to them.
Did he have a way of making everybody kind of want to do peasant stuff?
Absolutely. He did things like we would build our own maypole based on the old Celtic designs, and we had our own maypole parade, or May Day parade rather. We would do things that he would build in a lot of Druidic and pagan style things that we would do around the guild yard that weren't done anywhere else on faire. St. Helena's Guild at that point was huge. We had between 50 and 70 members for a couple of years, largely because of the things that Merlin did that made people want to come to Helena's and, and to be peasants. We, brought back sin eating, which is an interesting.
Is that what it sounds like?
Well, what would happen is you would have a casket that presumably had a cadaver in it, and people who had the money would pay the peasants to eat a feast in order to absolve the person in the casket's sins so that they could go to heaven. So the people who were eating the feast would take on the sins of the deceased person.
I thought you said fin, like a
No,
fish
sin.
in a. Oh, okay. Well, what food absorbed sin?
Anything. Usually it was a fairly good repast. They would, feed you well, but you got paid to eat in this particular case. But it was one of those pagan things that, Merlin's very knowledgeable about all of those pagan and Celtic belief systems.
Well, maybe we should get him up here to talk about the sin absolving qualities of cake and pastry.
I'm sure he would love to talk about that and a lot of other things.
So anyway, fair as an immersive experience.
It is such an immersive experience because you walk in the gate and you walk into time, a time long ago, 500 years ago, 600 now, I think. But you walk back in time, and if everyone who greets you is good day to thee, sir. I am so glad to see you upon the Shire this day. And people are just talking to you like that out of the clear blue, and everyone in costume you meet, or most everyone in costume you meet, does the same thing. Or they're trying to sell you something, like the mongers, who were usually very near the front of fair. You'd have to walk past them with their baskets of pig's head or chicken feet or fish. Yes. Remember in that day, refrigeration didn't exist. And so you had the sights, the sounds, the smells, the dust, plus the visual of all of these people in costume and the sounds of them all speaking in what ostensibly is kind of a foreign language to them until they kind of got their ear attuned. Watching that progression happen in 300 yards was always fun because the minute they walk in, especially for newbies, they're overwhelmed. And then you get the people who have really come to enjoy it so much, they come in their own costumes and they immediately start greeting people that they've met before. And they're just part of the village. They're just part of the Shire. And that just adds to what full ticket price paying customers are being immersed in. And, being part of that, I'm not sure if it's more of a cloud or a wave that just sort of envelops those people, and watching them just sort of get sucked up in it is that's pretty damn fun.
I think I'm going to edit this out, but I'll say it anyway. When I hung out with Dueling Buckets, they had another booth called Splatter Platter, and it it was a weird experience for me to hawk for that booth because basically it cost $1 to throw a plate against a wall. If you were to analyze this sales pitch, it made no sense at all. But if you said it in a sort of fair accent with false bravado, you could get a surprising number of people to throw a plate.
Probably drew pretty good crowds, probably drew better crowds than axe throwing.
Not really. I mean, people always watched archery.
Yeah.
That was the big leagues, the archery booth, and Dueling Buckets actually got more of an audience. People like to watch the drama of other people getting sprayed with water.
Oh, yeah. Well, when we would get into a water fight with several of us with buckets and throwing each other into the well, it was always a huge, huge crowd pleaser. Of course, we all had to stay in character and, make up fights about whether someone was claiming to get their whites whiter or someone stole a chicken, or, you always had to come up with something at the spur of the moment. But that was the greatest fun, was to, watch a couple of women with a couple of buckets throwing water at each other, and in some cases even ending up rolling around in the mud fighting. Of course, it was all very choreographed, especially if you were throwing someone into the well, because the well that we have now is made out of fiberglass, so it's not going to take a lot of weight, and you can break it pretty easily because we had to keep it light enough to move off-site. So you had to very carefully choreograph who could get thrown in the well and who could not get thrown in the well. And there were a lot of safety precautions of making sure you had a hand down so you didn't literally fall down and smack your head on the opposite side, because the well was only about 30 inches from on the inside. So it wasn't a really big space. So to get a body in there safely when you were looking like you were throwing someone in was, again, it was a practice in choreography and physical combat skills.
Which kind of brings me to my next question. Did you ever do any shows?
Yes, I did. I've done several shows.
What one springs to mind?
Well, of course, The Life and Times of Robert Greene.
Mhm.
which we did several times. That was a very fun show. We did
You were
a
very good in that, by the way.
Oh,
You
thank you,
you
Miss Hang You Down.
you sold the role of innkeeper's wife.
Having spent many years working at an ale stand, I had that roll down. It's a little bit of method acting going on there. We did on our small stage, we did A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I got to portray Titania, which was
Mhm.
one of the roles that so many of us, that's up on the pinnacle of, oh, if I could only have that chance to do that role. But of course, this was a
Totally.
much smaller stage, and I think the show ran about 40 minutes as opposed to 2.5 hours. So, but it was fun nonetheless. We did Commedia Ridiculi,
Mhm.
was the name of the company that we performed at Slow Fair, San Luis Obispo or Central Coast
Mhm.
Fair. Oh, The Enchanted Bucket was my first show. First on-stage experience at fair. That was my
Were you Sigfa, a field of wheat?
No, Sigfa was portrayed by Kirsten. She was hysterical because she had such those big, bright blue eyes. She could look so wide-eyed and innocent, and it just was brilliant. But no less brilliant was Mark Celine. He was in drag, and he used oranges as breasts,
He
and he
worked
could
on his entrance where they fell out.
he could get those things swinging around almost, forehead high. And when one of them would fly out into the audience and he would run chasing it, it was everything you could do on stage to not bust up.
Well, what role did you play then?
I'm trying to remember. I was the narrator.
Oh, okay. A good
Yeah.
role.
Yes, it was very fun.
Mhm.
That was the first time I got to get dressed up by costumes.
And you got to be the ringmaster. I remember almost
Mhm.
sort of writing that role, thinking of it as the ringmaster. I mean, you were there to set up every scene as it
Mhm.
came in and just sort of stand out of the way then
Yeah, and try not to laugh.
and try not to laugh.
I failed on that several times.
Well,
But yes, a ringmaster, because once the bit had been, you'd reached the pinnacle of it, you had to kind of pull the audience back in to focus on what was coming next.
right.
And again, that was really a good way of learning how to capture your audience and keep them focused when there's so much else going on, because it wasn't just us on stage. There were parades going by, and there were hawkers walking by, and food and drink and noise. And so being able to hold someone's attention for 40 minutes when there's all this other stuff going on, and they want to go see the joust, and they want to go get another turkey leg, and they want to go get another beer. Keeping them focused for 40 minutes turned out to be really much more difficult, but it was great fun.
That is one of my performance things I learned at fair is that the audience has a tenuous connection to you and you are continually revalidating it one time after another. And it doesn't take more than two or three boring things to happen for them to kind of go, I'm sitting on a hay bale in the sun, and over there's some shade and a beer. So bye.
You're right. And sometimes it would be, you'd get some people who would wander away and others who would go, oh, what's this group over here doing? And they would wander in and sit down for a little while. So when you were doing a show that was really popular and suddenly you look out there and you've got all of the hay bales full, and you've got people standing in the street watching as well, that's when you've really grabbed people, because people are saying, oh, you know what, they're standing in line at the ale stands and says, oh, you know what show you should go see? You should go see The Enchanted Bucket. It's so funny, you will laugh so hard. And so they go back and see it again, and drag along their new friend that they met in line waiting for their beer.
Actually, one of the signs of a successful show for me was that if fair kids made a point to come watch it.
I loved when the little kids would do that, because the fair brats, as they were referred to, because their parents were working and they had nothing to do but wander around fair, and so they would go find these shows, and they would literally memorize the shows, and they were our version of the groundlings. They would, like you said, sit on the ground, and they knew everybody's lines, and they knew when to laugh. And sometimes they would jump in, ahead of the action on the stage, but it meant they were true fans. And for some kids, that led them to ending up on stage and in different places. I mean, the highest one that I remember is, of course, Hannah, who she started out as a fair brat, and she sort of worked her way up through the ranks at fair and ended up playing the queen for several years. And she was brilliant at it because she had grown up around it.
Which brings me to another point. Fair is a place to raise kids. It's always seemed to me it was a great place to raise kids.
I will agree to that to a very large degree. But when your kids are raised in that environment, they are exposed to a lot of different things that they're not going to experience in their regular life. For instance, they're going to see people that are in costume and in character, and they know that they're just acting because they know them in real life. And then there are the customers, and they know they're two different sets of people, and you treat them differently because you don't go up and just say, "Hey, Fred," to somebody who's in character, because that you'll spoil that illusion. And so they learn to act and react with the actors differently than they do the patrons. They learn a lot about inclusion and different types of abilities of people because you have crowds of 10,000 people all in that one shire. So there you're going to see everybody of, all colors, all walks of life, all abilities, genders, sensibilities. So you just this is what people are really like. It's so diverse. And they get used to that, which I think is great in real life because they become much less judgmental out in the world. They also understand better the idea of, oh, if I'm a participant, I have to participate. For instance, my youngest son, he ended up getting a job working at the petting zoo and teaching the patrons who would come in how to correctly handle the animals, protect the animals, make sure they didn't get hurt. Things he had to do is run around and clean up offal because nobody wants to step in it. So you keep that area sort of clean. So it's not a great job, but works for him was he got to play with the animals and talk to people and show them how to properly handle them with kindness. That gave him a pretty good skill set of having a lot of different people, and some of whom were inebriated adults who would have one idea, and he would have to very gently and kindly explain to them why they shouldn't, yank on the chicken, the
Yeah, I think we can all
waddle
yeah.
waddle thing. Yeah, but being able to do it nicely and kindly and not really.
And how somehow being in character makes it easier to enforce the rules because it's not really you enforcing the rules. It's good Shire Bob, the peasant.
Exactly. I will definitely agree that doing stuff in character is definitely easier for the people who can be easily led. There are sometimes people will cross the line and you have to drop character and say, look, that's not okay. And you do it very sotto voce, and you don't want to make a big scene and just say, look, you can't keep coming up and grabbing that woman's breast. It's not okay. I will call security. And that happened more to me when I was the ale stand, because you'd get, people who had too much and they just felt the lines were too blurred and they could do whatever they wanted. And you would have to step out of character to get them to pay attention, because they thought, well, this is just an actress. I can do whatever I want, until you drop character and then suddenly they take you seriously.
I had a question, and it's not fair related at all. First of all, did you feel when you were negotiating with an agent that you were in a character? And did you ever have to drop that character for an
Yes.
effect?
Yes. This is a very long time ago. There was an agent who represented two of the main voices on one of our animated projects. And he was very into his agent character, and he was very blustery and full of himself and conceited and very much of the "don't you know who I am" sort of guy. And because my boss, she did most of the larger, higher end deals because, she's higher on the totem pole. So it was appropriate. And he treated her less than because he thought she is a woman and I can just barge through her and get what I want. And it got to the point where she said to me, I mean, the screaming matches on the phone. And she said to me, I'm not speaking with him anymore. If we have to do a deal with any of these actors, you have to deal with him. I'm not speaking to him. So I went in and I was congenial and he tried to barge through me. And I held the line that my boss had held and he would start screaming. And I finally said to him one day, I said, I appreciate you take this very seriously and you represent your clients very well. But if you don't stop screaming at me, I'm going to hang up. And he started in on another tirade and I hung up. And about 10 minutes later, he called back. We started talking again. And he started screaming again. I said, if you don't stop screaming, I'm going to hang up. And he started screaming again and started in even bigger with the, don't you know who I am? And I just hung up. He didn't call back for about a half an hour. And then he called back and he said, can we have this conversation now? I said, sure, until you start screaming at me. When you start yelling, I'm done. And your client won't get the job and we'll move on to another actor. And we had a great working relationship after that. So I had to step out of being the nice studio executive into just being rude. Not quite as rude as he was being, but just firm and saying, no, here's a line you can't cross in order to talk to me. So then I became like the typical studio executive who is like, this is my world and my rules, and you will follow it.
Do you think that living in the duality of faire made that an easier transition?
Oh, sure. Because you're used to jumping in and out of character at a moment's notice. When you're at faire, you can't be your character from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. You take breaks and then you go backstage and you get to let your hair down for a minute and cool off and have something to eat. And then you're yourself again. You were backstage and taking a break and something starts happening out front, especially, when you are the assistant guildmaster. So you have some level of authority and somebody comes back and says, hey, we got a problem out front. You have to leap back into character and come in and sort of assess the situation. And is this a situation I can deal with as my character? Or is this time to have one hand on the walkie to call security? Fortunately, we at the Guild at St. Helens, we never had to call security on anybody. We always managed to contain it to the point where they never got so out of hand we couldn't just speak to them and bring them down off whatever ledge they were on, which, hooray, that meant that we had very capable women who were the hands-on running the Guild. But it was just a matter of being able to do as much as you can in character and not dropping character unless you had to, but being able to have that as a backstop in the event it became necessary.
I started by talking about how the peasants ate so well at faire. And I assume that did not happen by magic. And so...
Well, if only it had been, 30 people contributing. It was ostensibly a potluck, but I would say if we had 18 dishes on the table at our particular Guild site, it was because 3 of us had made 5 of them. And quite literally, we would start, the 3 of us, the other 2, Shelley and Sharon, they were as much a part of that as I was. And they were, I had the title of assistant guildmaster, but they behaved as if. But we literally, the 3 of us would start cooking on Wednesday. Friday nights, many Friday nights, I was up until 2:00 in the morning, only to get up at 6:00 in the morning to get everything loaded into the car and haul it all in, and coolers and coolers and coolers and coolers because we had no electricity or gas. So everything that was hot, we had to make it hot and figure out how to keep it hot. And anything that was cold, we had to make it so that it could stay cold. We would get probably 5 20-pound bags of ice each morning. They would, the faire would deliver ice. And so we would just fill those coolers up, and that would be everything to keep all of the food cold, as well as, drinks. Some people would occasionally bring in, a sweet treat. Joyce was always good for bringing in some amazing dessert that she had made that was based off of a period recipe, as well as being our basic production designer for the whole look of the guild and the guild site. So there was a lot of work that went into it.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh.
But what is your sort of go-to faire recipe for 30?
The one that was the most popular for me, if there was a weekend I didn't bring deviled eggs, people were disappointed. And you had to be there on time to get them. And I would usually do 2 dozen. And we would tell people sometimes, no, you can't have 5. Shelley, for that many people, she would do pulled pork in a crock pot. So it would cook all night. She would season it up, leave it in that crock pot and bring it out. And it was, by the time lunchtime rolled around, it was still warm. It was safe to eat. She was certified in food prep. She took a class to make sure that she could sort of keep us all in line.
And alive.
And alive with no sickness. Sharon tended to focus on big salads or veggies, or a big salad full of veggies, as well as, leafy greens and stuff. Plus things like apples and pears and plums just set out would make it look pretty. And it was also practical because people would just grab those and wander around with them. Potatoes and having fresh churned butter, which is one of the things I did for years and years and years, was I would get up in the morning. One of the first things I would do as soon as the gates opened was start churning butter. And I would do a couple of pounds per day. And we would use it, both at the table, and I would be using it as a teaching tool for people who would come by and see what I was doing and ask how it worked. And sometimes they would want to try it. They'd be surprised. Wow, this takes us a lot longer than I thought, and it's harder. And it was kind of fun for me because not only did I get to do it, which was a great time to just sit on a hay bale and watch people go by and just interact. It was picturesque. People would want to come and sit next to me and take a picture, which was fun. They'd want to try it. I'd move and they'd sit down at the churn, and it was informative and educational. Today it's really easy. If you've got a food processor or even just a mason jar, you can make your own butter. And it's just really, and people would say, oh my God, I'm going to go home and do this. So that kept people fed and watered, because that's the one thing people forget, is to keep people watered at faire, especially when it's hot. And we not just watched out for the people in our guild, but for instance, when the guard would come by, we would offer to fill their tankards with water to make sure that while they were out in the sun, they were watered. When I was working at the well, pre-COVID, people could come up to the well and we would wet their sleeves down on their shirts because that would help. They were their own air conditioner. Swamp cooler is kind of doesn't sound good, but that's what it was. You wet their clothes down, they get a little breeze, and it cools them off.
That brings to mind 2 different things. Did you cover your crock pot with burlap?
If I was using a ceramic, I would not use burlap usually, unless it was available. We didn't always have extra burlap laying around, but because you have to be able to take it off at the end of the day to wash it in hot water. So I bring it home. Usually what I would do is tie a towel around it, like a cotton or linen towel around.
How did you deal with patrons in character who wanted to, like if you're serving a potato and they would say, potatoes aren't common in Elizabethan time at this time. They suddenly were the expert and they were telling you why you're doing it wrong.
For things like that, and occasionally we would have that happen, you would just explain to them that Port Deptford, which is the shire that we were in, was a port town. And so we had the ability to play off of that because we would get a lot of ships that would come into port, and they would be coming from some of these far off lands, and they would be selling some of these things that other ports weren't able to access. So we would be the first as the port town to maybe be able to, what is this new vegetable coming in from the New World? What is this thing coming from Spain? Ooh, how exotic and how expensive those were. And, somebody did, for instance, at the well, we could have oranges because the captain of this particular ship came in and he had a very delicate situation with what happened with his underclothing that needed to be cleaned and without anyone knowing about it. So in exchange for our not saying anything, he gifted us with a bag of oranges. So you would just, again, it was that sort of that improv where you would make things up as it went along, depending on what the questions were.
And is that a job skill as well?
Oh, absolutely. Especially if you're negotiating as, somebody's pushing really hard that, well, my client has never not had a solo trailer. Well, I'm sorry, but, we're working in an area where you can't drive in. They have to take you in by van. So your dressing room is not even going to be at the set. It's going to be a 20-minute van ride away. And everybody has to do that, including the director. So we're really sorry we can't accommodate what your client is expecting. We are, however, doing the very best we can. And this is how we can accommodate you.
Would you like an orange?
Yeah. Something along those lines. Yeah, you have to kind of roll with the punches, as it were, and be able to say, well, I can't give you this, but I can give you that. And what we're offering you is as good as we can offer anyone else. And so learning how to, again, it's that improv negotiation. I mean, this is a hilarious story. On one of the films we worked on, we were shooting in Romania, and one of the actors was a bodybuilder, and he was on this very strict diet where he had to have this particular soup, and that's pretty much all he ate. And he had to have a crock pot on set. Again, with the crock pot. So the associate producer went all over the local towns. There was not a crock pot to be had. And this guy said, I can't keep my physique in this shape to look this good on film unless I have a crock pot with my particular soup. So we ended up having to send a production assistant here in LA, go find a crock pot and have it shipped to Romania so this guy could have his soup that kept him in his peak physical condition. The soup was horrible. It was like cabbage and onions and celery, and it was you would not ever want to eat this soup.
So anyway, I'm getting to Roman numeral 4 on my list here. Conclusion: sell the fare to somebody. Why should you go and work?
Oh, like taking someone from the office?
Sure.
That happened. I was talking about
what did you
fare.
tell them?
I told them, I said, you will never experience anything like this in any other place. You can go watch a stage show and you have very delineated roles. You can go to an improv show. Again, you have delineated roles, even though it is improv. You can go to an escape room. There are a lot of different styles of entertainment you can go to, but nothing is quite as immersive as this. And it's in period, so it's really different. And I just told some of the stories of things that happened over the weekend. And this woman got so excited. She says, well, I want to go, but I don't want to go unless I can go in costume. And I said, okay, well, I can help you put together some pieces, but, and I'll check with some other, because she was taller and a very different body type than mine. So most of my costume pieces would not fit her. And she said, oh, no. I want a costume. I want to go as, merchant class or above. Okay, well, I would have her. Oh no, I want to own this costume. Okay, this is someone who had made up her mind and decided she was going to do it. And
was this like on Wednesday or something? And she wanted?
Oh no, she knew it was going to take weeks.
Okay.
And I think she ended up waiting until the next year because one of my friends ended up custom making her a costume, and it was all in the wrong colors, and she knew it, and she didn't care. It was all about the fit and how it looked. And it was in, soft pinks and pastel blues. It was definitely not period colors, but those were the colors she wanted, and it fit the way she wanted. When she did come out, she had a parasol to go. I think I may have loaned her my parasol. It's very Sun-averse. But she came out and she spent the whole day and she had a grand time, and she went to shows, and she came and hung out with us at the Guild Yard, and she turkey legged, and she had ale, and she went around and she said, I have now done it the way I want to do it. And she hasn't been back. She had that one experience, but she spent several $100s on that costume, and she keeps the costume, but it was hot. It was dusty. It was not her thing.
One of
That
the
was,
good things about peasants is that you weren't wearing many clothes and they could get wet fast.
we still have on 3 to 4 layers.
Oh, I was talking as a guy.
Oh, it was a guy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I liked being a peasant, not a noble, was that I liked to breathe.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Bodies are strange because I know some women who start wearing their bodices and they're not corsets. These often have stomachers, which hold your stomach flat and then cinch in your waist. They most often have sleeves or shoulder straps that are built into one, it's all one piece. Once you get into the higher classes, you can change your sleeves out. You can put on different bands, and those are more corsety than bodices. But all of them were designed to give women a particular figure. Wider at the top, slimmer in the middle, big skirts, hips. So I know some women who will start wearing their bodices a few weeks before fair starts for a few hours a day to sort of get used to that feeling and being able to breathe and literally compressing your ribs and remembering, oh yeah, I can't take as big a breath in this way as I usually do. Performers, it's even harder because especially if you're on stage and you need to project, because most of us don't have microphones, you definitely can't use just chest breath. You have to be able to learn to push it down into your bellows, the bottom part of your lungs, in order to get that much power in order for you to project loud enough to be heard without trashing your voice.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, it is different for guys. You most often get away with a very loose doublet.
Moving right along. Are you working on any current projects now or plans you'd like to share with us now?
Currently, no, which is I'm feeling the need. As you know, I started cycling again, which has me up and moving physically more than I have in a couple of years. And now I'm getting antsy. I would like to get back into something theatrical.
That counts. Now,
Yeah.
this is probably a comment I can edit out, but do you have any audio files of you at fair that I can attach to this?
Like, I know people would come and stand in front of the well and listen to us sing and hold up their phones, but it never occurred to me to do that. I'm busy at the well slapping laundry.
You had a job to do, damn it.
Got to get those clothes clean.
Yeah. Okay, well, this has been
I was going to say that's actually one of the most common questions that while at my time at the well was, why do you beat fabric on laundry, your laundry on rocks? And it was always a good educational moment that I always just thought was so fun to explain to them why it works and how it would even work for them.
Well, that sort of segues into, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave my wide podcast listening audience with?
Podcasts are wonderful. You can listen to them while you're, at your desk, car, whatever. They're fun. If you really would like to get the full experience, go to fair. You can sort of get a much better feel of what we've been talking about when you're standing in the dust and the sun and you're surrounded by hawkers and mongers, and you have to clear the way because of the royalty are coming through. It's really a fun, immersive experience, and it's educational, it's enjoyable. I also encourage people to go early in the season and go early in the day, so it's cooler.
And does it make them a better employee or employer?
I think it will make you appreciate your comfy desk chair in air conditioning job when you see what other people had to do for a living, like, sitting in the hot sun, washing clothes. You see the blacksmiths, you see what the knife makers are doing, all of these different things. Women, especially if you go to Kelp Camp where you see the women with the looms, because fabric you didn't just go buy fabric for the most part. These are the people who made the fabric for the people who had money to buy. And what was left over is what was sort of sold to the common. It had all of the mistakes in it. So you can see your job is pretty cushy, compared to you sit and poke little buttons as opposed to hauling water from the well
Well, I think I'm going to push the pause stop button. Well, that's it for this episode of Fair Folk at Work. My guest has been Bailey Spencer Jackson. If you'd like to contact her, you can email us at djng@earthlink.net, and we'd be happy to pass it along. Questions or comments on the podcast can also be directed to djng@earthlink.net. Finally, if you would like to be a guest on Fair Folk at Work, you can also email us at djng@earthlink.net. Well, that's all for this time, and thanks for listening. Bye-bye.